terms and conditions. Oh. Aha, we are recording. Pew, pew, pew. What's up, everyone? Welcome to our Retro. I love the ability to double up on terminology like that. That's just fantastic. Okay, so we are here as the great badge holders of the first Optimism Retro DAO experiment, plus Vitalik, I guess, so we're not strictly only badge holders. Vitalik holds a special badge in our hearts. And yeah, we wanted to, now that we have the results are in and we've had some time to ruminate, we thought it would be cool to get everyone on a call and just chat and discuss, very open discussion, what went well, what didn't, all those wonderful sorts of things, and just, yeah, talk about what went down, what we can do better next time.
Heads up, Yoav, we're recording this.
Yes, hi, Yoav, welcome.
Hi.
I think I go to start with the badge of shame for probably voting for my own project the highest. I think next time when I do this, I'm going to vote less hard for myself. So sorry for that.
Actually, I mean, you were upfront about it in the Telegram, Austin, so I think that's fine. But I think it spurs a really interesting discussion around the terminology in the badge holder manual. Hanan, do you happen to have that on hand?
I can dig that up right now.
It's something like one must not vote to have funds flow to themselves. And my personal reading of that is, as long as it doesn't end up in the badge holder's hands in its final state. But
it never does. Everything that I voted for will go to developers I'm mentoring. I promise it is not anything that goes to me.
But I'm curious what people think about, you know, if one of the badge holders has a public goods distribution mechanism of their own. And it could still be that, you know, maybe these like developers that you're mentoring are actually your offspring. And so it could still benefit you to distribute to your offspring. So it is a potential loophole if, you know, 2 decades from now, we don't have very close friends as badge holders. Never mind. Do you guys know what I'm saying? Thoughts?
Yeah. No, it's definitely a complicated gray area. I guess we expected all along that it's a gray area. And even in traditional law, the concept of self-dealing is always very gray area. So we should not necessarily expect to be able to solve the problem better than the real world has solved it, which is often not very well, with a lot of things falling on both wrong sides of the line. I guess, like, what's the usual way to handle this sort of stuff? Like, one of the usual kind of techniques is to like have a rule that people should be transparent whenever there's even a slight possibility that what they're doing could be interpreted as self-dealing, just so that that particular case could be discussed openly.
I think Austin was quite upfront about it, if I recall. There's no...
And also, like, first thing in front of like all my heroes here, first thing I say it too and shame myself. But next time I'll do better, and I just won't vote for myself as much, right? Like, I'll vote. Yeah, I'll just do better next time.
I really appreciate you bringing this up. I think it's a really great topic for discussion, and everyone is here because they have some like track record of doing good shit for the rest of the ecosystem. So no shame at all. I'm really actually grateful that you brought it up as a topic, because I think I would have felt nervous to bring it up otherwise. But we should definitely discuss it. If I were participating in your public goods distribution thing, I absolutely would have voted for Optimism. So where do we draw the line? Because, yeah, any thoughts? Did anyone have thoughts when they saw Austin message the Telegram group about that?
I saw it, and I had the same situation, and I decided to not vote for myself, but propose my project. I mean, so I proposed it, but voted for something else, and I thought that was like the like tacit rule that we had.
So I should not. I just shouldn't have voted for myself.
Defined.
Lesson learned.
Well, but it was like mentioned in the chat, like it wasn't like a rule, you know.
Yeah, in Austin's defense, the strict language of what we put in the badge manual, Austin has not broken any of that strict language. So this is partially a problem with drafting. And I think a good norm for us to follow here is that we should follow the rules that we put in the manual. And so if there are loopholes in those rules, we need to amend those rules. We can't be ex post changing those rules and applying them before the fact. So I think Austin's vote should stand, and we should amend the rules as a takeaway here.
Yeah, I was in a very similar situation, and I decided just to, campaign for my projects rather than vote for them. And I think like making the language more precise would be really beneficial. And I think this is the lesson learned, because like also it's like often when you're like leading some kind of organization and you're getting some grants, and even if you're not benefiting directly, you're probably benefiting indirectly in some sense, right? Like usually this is at least a case in the with the projects that I'm involved with, even though I'm not getting this money as a salary or any other way. But I can hire more people, and this will help like the company's vision and so on, which will benefit me indirectly. So that's why I just didn't vote for myself.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, the reality is that you want people that have expert like info that understand why this good is extremely valuable. But oftentimes the reason it's valuable is because you use it and you like that, that value is right in your face, right? So you're right. It's very, very gray. What's up, Proto?
So same story here. I didn't vote for myself, but didn't nominate myself. Then FM decided to YOLO, and I did end up in the list and even got some votes. I really appreciate it, but I think it's better to avoid these kind of conflicts. We should amend the rules to be more clear on how this is going to work. And then I'm also in this unique situation where in the middle of the thing, I started working with Optimism. So now it's even a larger conflict of interest than it was before. At the same time, though, the funding is retroactive. So technically it's for Ethereum 2 and like general Ethereum work, which I'll keep doing as well. But it's blurry.
I actually
We
think
have other open roles, everybody, by the way.
the idea of like, someone now working for like Optimism or now working for a team and having done like, I also saw Danny Ryan was like on a list, and I'm like, I think that like Danny Ryan should definitely be like voted for. Like there's people like that, like who have done a lot historically, even if they are being paid by like another organization at the moment. So I think that's actually totally valid. But I also agree that in general, like proposing yourself but not voting for yourself is the easiest way to avoid those conflicts in the future.
I just also wanted to say that I think that the ultimate goal of what we're doing is trying to retroactively fund projects and people. And the more time we spend determining if there are conflicts of interest, like the less time we have to try and figure out who should best be funded. And this is, to me, like a good reason, especially in the beginning, to just avoid it. Like we already have to try and figure out how to deal with voting for people we have relationships with. Like I think that especially now it's such a tight-knit community, even if I'm not directly benefiting, I am voting for people who I would consider my friends. And that's already like a tricky enough situation, let alone like also things that I could personally benefit from.
Matt, I recall you said that you weren't going to vote for any badge holders project. Did you end up doing that? And if so, could you say more about why?
As far as I'm aware, I didn't vote for any badge holders projects or people who are like badge holders who are affiliated with certain projects. The main reason is that I felt like this is the first time we're doing this retro PGF through this like Optimism funding model, and I felt that we should do our best to do it right and set an example for how funding should be for the future. Because I would hate to see this exciting way of funding public goods being drugged through the dirt in CoinDesk or something by saying so-and-so voted for themselves or so-and-so voted for this project, their friends. And so that was like the main reason that I tried to abstain from voting for any people on this committee's projects.
Annie?
Yeah, I think on that note, I'm curious how folks who are badge holders thought of their votes, like in a meta way, because I think, or the way I'm interpreting this conversation is whether you can vote for yourself. So I guess the framing is, did folks see themselves as like a delegated politician that's representing the part of the ETH or Optimism community that they knew, and you have to vote based on the people you know? Or is it based on purely yourself, your own experience? Like for me, I think I was voting like half as an Optimism employee, thinking about what will benefit the Optimism ecosystem, and half as like, or what has benefited the Optimism ecosystem, and then half as like my own like developer experience of what has been very useful for me. And that was kind of how I weighted my votes. So I'm wondering like what the thoughts, like what kind of mental models do people use? Because you can also do like a really like numbers one. It's just like, oh, most stars on GitHub, or yeah, something that's more numerical or more representative.
This was something I was a little conflicted about because I felt like I overweighted my votes towards core infrastructure because I felt like I was trying to represent that area that I have expertise in, whereas there were probably like more people involved with the application development side of things, and I felt like they would represent the tools and the projects they're familiar with and use. And I feel like that's maybe a good way to go forward, is try and have fair representation of like different communities and people, and have them try and vote for the things that they're familiar with, because it would be more difficult for me to accurately represent what is like valuable for a smart contract developer, whereas it's a lot easier for me to accurately represent who I think like researchers that have made contributions and protocol teams that have made contributions.
Agree. Calvin? Or sorry, Liam.
I was just going to agree. Yeah, I voted based on my experience. I've seen a lot of things, done a lot of things.
Oh no.
Did we lose him?
Over that time, I
Sorry.
noticed certain projects, some of them on this list. And yeah, I based it on what I knew and my own experience. I think I'm a badge holder because I have experience and expertise in things, and so I weighted it based on that. I didn't try to defer to an algorithm or anything.
I voted poorly, honestly, in hindsight. Anyway, Calvin, keep going.
Cool. Yeah, I wanted to talk about two things here. I think the first one is related to the discussion we're having, so I'll just say it. I think it would be really nice to have a more formal process around like what the, at least a more fleshed out spec for what the proposal should look like. I think we spent a lot of time going over the proposals. We had that big call before the vote where we were talking about like, what are all of these projects? What are they, and like some of us knew a lot of them, some of us didn't, I don't know, whatever. But I feel like we could capture a lot more information in those proposals that would help us make decisions, right? There's just like a lot of, essentially because we didn't have that information, and we didn't have anyone who was tasked to go find it, we were spending a lot of time digging through it ourselves, and it wasn't clear. Anyway, so I basically am proposing that we come up with a more detailed schema of what the proposal should look like. And then the second thing that I'll say is just like an obvious learning, I think, from this this round is we should ask the projects before they get put on the voting list, because I'm sure there are a couple, I mean, we know of multiple projects that don't need the funding, don't want the funding, whatever it is. Like, We shouldn't just throw money at people who are like, I don't need your money. I don't want your money, right? So there should be some confirmation step. Those are the two main things two main takeaways from this.
Agree. B?
Yeah, so I think from the point of view of just like designing the mechanism, the whole conflict of interest issue is also one of the reasons, probably one of the key reasons why I've been pushing for the badge holder number being larger rather than smaller, even in the early experiments. Like basically, to the extent that we can't handle conflict of interest by talking about it and having rules, we might as well dilute it, so that like basically any particular projects, the portion of the badge holders who are their insiders can't be that large. So that's, which again I think like 24 decision makers for an initial round is already pretty good, and hopefully it'll keep getting better. And then the other thing is also just thinking through the composition of badge holders and like how that reflects the different types of expertise that people have. So the outcomes this round have definitely been very technology focused, which was that was not part of any kind of explicit specification, right? Like I don't think there was any explicit statements that said that technology is the thing that matters, but like we chose technology experts as badge holders, and so we got a lot of technology. And maybe that was a good corrective after all the Gitcoin rounds funding anti-bro synthesis, but like realistically, we want some I think things in the community space, like translations, documentation, meetup organizing, like other kinds of things funded as well, and just expanding the set of the set of badge holders, kind of expanding them, like trying to explicitly find badge holders with different areas of interest, and different focuses, different parts of the world that they're from, and kind of trying to expand it out along the different axes would be interesting to experiment with future rounds.
I think I think maybe Scott said this earlier as well, but on the topic of, or maybe it was Matt, badge holders, we tried to piece together kind of a Noah's Ark of badge holders. On the initial Excel sheet where we were brainstorming people, we noted who's a smart contract developer, who's working for a DeFi project, who's core infrastructure. The worry I have with bringing on more badge holders is that each badge holder, if they're only voting on their area of expertise and not making the effort to consider where the money is going holistically, what impact would that have? That's one question. Another question is, how the fuck are we going to find more badge holders? Where do we find them?
We have a wonderful and vast ecosystem. We'll just ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can. I think this opens up a lot of opportunities to do like category specific rounds, right? And like being able to potentially delegate your vote to somebody to stand in for you as like, I'm doing there's a round of the Retro PGF that's specifically focused on the work that people have done in building out the like crypto community from purely from a social standpoint. I'll delegate out to somebody who I feel like has a much better understanding of what's been valuable in the crypto community, instead of taking, and I'm sure I can find somebody who'd be more than happy to do that. But yeah, it's hard for everybody to have this sort of domain knowledge in everything, and I'm naturally going to just vote on what I know about, right?
Scott and Ale should speak, but then I'm curious to know from you guys, after your experience, what you think constitutes a good badge holder.
I'll note one thing quickly, which is just like for domain experts, like, yeah, how do we, maybe it's worth someone or like, putting out a Twitter or whatever poll, or like having some way to curate for sets of like categories, to like Kelvin's point, like an initial list, like seed list for each category. And then we could take nominations for each of those like community versus infrastructure sort of like sections. Because I do think that's a really important point. Like some people definitely have more expertise in one area. And I think that like, if we're relying on domain expertise, it has to be like specific. Like it has to definitely like be specific to like individual areas. The answer to the question about what makes a good badge holder though is definitely complicated. I think the degree to which people propose projects, I think there's probably a distribution of like how many projects did each badge holder like actually nominate. Like that would be interesting. I don't know what the formal numbers are, but I'd be curious to see. And I'd also be curious to see like the level of detail they put into those nominations. Like how, you know, did they just kind of write a line like, this is a good project? Like, did they give like clear reasoning? And then I think just kind of going back to, not to credential people too much, like I think that's like difficult, but like to be like how, what relevance is their experience with the project that they're nominating? Like why are they sort of like the right person to nominate this project? So like if Proto nominates something that's infrastructure focused, I'm like, probably Proto knows a lot more about like what he's saying than I would about like anything in that category. So like those would be like initial criteria that I think would be useful as like that list expands, but yeah.
So to sum it up, Scott, I'm hearing like levels of actual participation in surfacing what should be nominated is one of the things that you think constitutes a good badge holder.
Yes, definitely just like all those different parts of participation.
Yeah, I think that
Ale?
I think that as a badge holder, you have to go beyond your area of expertise in the criteria of voting, right? For example, I did not vote for a technical project, and I am extremely technical, right? I voted for what I thought was needed more recognition and needs more help right now, right? I'm not gonna say what it is, but like I thought that's what I was thinking about, like who needs this the most, and why does the space need this project to succeed, right, or to be recognized? And that's like depending on the criteria of the badge holder. So it's completely up to the badge holder. So what do we do in that case? We have badge holders elect badge holders, right? You have to keep it up somehow, like keep your score up, or you have people elect the badge holders, and then it's up to the badge holder to do a good job in that sense. And given that I'm speaking, I also wanted to talk about maybe we can talk about it later, but I also want to talk about focusing versus diluting the funds, right? Because I want, when I saw the results, I was wondering, what if we got all this and we helped the winner, right? It would cause like a bigger impact, right? Everyone received like small donations that for sure will help, right? But maybe if this one project that's struggling to make it, right, if they receive a bigger donation, then maybe it changes the whole situation for them.
Yeah, I think Jenny, you asked something very similar in the chat. Did you have anything to add to that before we show the fairness ratio?
I would just say it's a good conversation happening in the chat, and I think the point about the fact that it's retroactive funding is actually important to remember here. Like when going for nominations, to me it seems like, okay, let's find stuff that needs it, but then there is also this piece, right? Like we should fund stuff that doesn't need it anymore. I don't know. There is some tension here for me, but I think it's a good space to explore. I'm sure there's a lot of projects that are at the intersection of this, anyways.
I think.
I think that's one of the big things that we want to test is that if we have a pool available for exit capital, will pockets of seed funding pop up? So instead of looking at the projects and saying, oh shit, which of these projects needs the money today so that they can make it to their next milestone tomorrow, we can simply say, who can we give an exit to and have the free market decide who they want to fund through the seed and growth stages. But obviously this is only the first one, and $1 million is not enough for an exit for any project. But there's an idea called the fairness ratio, which Carl and Will at Uniswap, I forget his last name, Will Hennessy have been discussing. Do you want to shill it real quick, Carl?
Sure. It's just, the value added by a project divided by the value extracted by the project. And you want that value, that ratio, to always equal 1. So if a project extracts tons of value, but like adds only a little bit, then that's bad. But also if a project adds a ton of value and only extracts a tiny bit, that's also bad, because we want to reward people for adding value. And so it's you go.
So for example, Synthetics and Chainlink both got no votes in the Retro PGF round. But if we started taking into consideration, okay, maybe, Synthetics is charging for usage of their baby diaper product, but they're only charging, way less than cost. They're not making a profit. Then as the mommy blogger community, we still want to funnel funds into that project, even if it's privately held, for profit, etc. It's still in the public's interest to do so. That's the idea behind the fairness ratio. Who's next? Kelvin?
Yeah. First, I want to say that I think the fairness ratio is a really good way to think about it. I think it's really clear, like, if there's been a project that's been hugely successful, like it's clearly valuable, but they're also making money off of it, right? Like they're not doing it for free or whatever. I think that it's perfectly, it intuitively makes sense. Like, what's the point of funding this project? That's clearly, yes, it's done a lot of good, but they're also doing perfectly fine for themselves, and they're extracting value, sort of cover that value that they get. So I do think this is a really good way to think about it. Try to think about, are these organizations really making anything out of this? Are they just giving it all away for free, or are they making money out of it? So
I'm going to encourage the conversation to migrate from the chat into the main thing of attention. So if you have something you want to say, just throw your hand up.
Yeah. The second thing is, I think a good thing for the next time that we talk, like have this voting process, is to kind of make a lot of these things more clear up front, about like what are the metrics that we recommend that people think about these things, that we recommend that people like consider their votes on, because I think a lot of people had very different ideas of what, like, just the fact that we're having a conversation that's like, okay, we want to fund projects that that need the money the most, like that's a very specific way of looking at it, and I don't think it's necessarily wrong. I just think I would like to have a deeper conversation, a longer conversation, because I don't think we're going to be able to have this conversation fully right now, that just like talks through a lot of this and kind of tries to establish some general guidelines for how we expect people to vote in round N.
On the fairness ratio, I feel like sometimes it's difficult to know how much they extract. Like, I don't know how much has Etherscan extracted. It's really not clear to me how much money they make. I'm sure they make some, but like I literally don't even have an order of magnitude of how much money they make. That's kind of why I feel like if we vote on value, this is like the most clear attribute that we can see and understand.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, just to hop in really quickly, maybe you make it a requirement as part of the proposal process that like the people who are going to receive the funding have to actually give really clear numbers as to how much money they're making. And like open source projects that aren't making a ton of money are just going to be like, we're not making anything, And if it's a project that doesn't want to talk about how much money they're making because they're making a ton of money, don't fund them, right? So it's not. Maybe make that part of the requirement.
That would require us to first have like a onboarding process for each new like participant though, right? Like they would have to, so we're kind of like deciding two things in that case, which I think is also very valid. Like that's like definitely, I would be for that transparency, because it's a huge issue of like, yeah, projects that like low key have like tons of capital, but like are not really disclosing that. We've seen that issue a few times in previous like Gitcoin grants rounds, where you know a project gets like pretty high up on the list, and it's like, well, like okay, but like is this like a VC backed project? Like there's like some indications. It's like that becomes a huge problem. I just wanted to note though, going back to like the value point, like I definitely don't think that because something has raised like money that it's necessarily like bad to fund. So you know, like I put like a bunch of funding toward, or like a bunch of votes towards like I don't know, like I think Wallet Connect has raised a little bit of capital, but like I think Wallet Connect has provided outsized value. So to me, that turns out to be like a good kind of like fairness balance, to Carl's point. But like in this model, like could that lead to them being disqualified from retro funding, like even before they're able to start? So that's, I'm not sure what the proper balance is, but it's tricky.
Hanan?
Just want to discuss a bit kind of the underlying assumptions behind some of these conversations, right? So do we actually want to impose a metric or a style of thinking top down? Is the heterogeneity in how people think about these things a feature, or is it a bug?
So
And how
I
people
wanted
think about what things. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
actually to talk a little bit more about fairness ratio. So maybe you can. Should I go now, or?
I think so.
Maybe I'll just clarify what I meant. So, you know, like people are coming at this very differently, right? So some are like, well, look, I should be deploying the capital in the way that I am most credentialed and most knowledgeable about, right? Others are saying, well, look, it's more important for me to allocate the capital based on how much the projects need it. Others say, well, look, I want to think about this from a fairness ratio basis, right? I'm thinking that Carl has laid out. So is the fact that we've had these different approaches and different styles of thinking, is that a bug or is that a feature, right? It seems like there's kind of this assumption in the conversation we're having that it's a bug and that it should be fixed. I just wanted to maybe examine that assumption before maybe going further down that conversation.
I'd say that it's a bug if we are all voting based on different voting criteria. You know, in the original post by Vitalik, we talk about the results oracle as the determinant of like who gets how much money. And the MVP of the results oracle in the near term, the thing that's easiest to put out there is just like 24 smart people who kind of know the ecosystem pretty well. But I think everyone should be using the same criteria for making decisions. You know, if Transmissions is making decisions based on who's going to build more in the future, and, you know, Jenny is making decisions based on just concretely who gets this exit pool, you get like pretty, you know, scattered votes. But I think it's a feature that each person is coming to this discussion with a different understanding of what they were supposed to have done. I think it shows the diversity in brains that we brought into this discussion, and it's exactly that diversity that will get us to the best path.
Yeah, I would just add, like, I think if you look at it, I think it's super interesting that we were able to fund like 60 different projects. Like, I think something that I would worry about is if we all are like really tightly on the same decision criteria, is that like, you know, 5 projects get all the funding. And I don't know, I think it's nice. And maybe there's like some number that's like more ideal than 60 that's lower or whatever. But like, I think it's, I don't know, I'm not mad about that part. I think it was nice to see and like learn about these projects if I didn't know them already.
Can we give it Just before Chris goes, sorry, I wanted to ask, can we get Vitalik's answer on Hanan's question, just because his hand's up, and I think he had an initial kind of
What was
idea.
my answer to which, or the question of like, should we be imposing more guidelines, or should we accept, like, be embracing the fact that people have different ways of thinking about the issues? I guess like, it's always a balance. Like, I think embracing the like differences in people's views is good, but at the same time, you also don't want badge holders, and especially new badge holders that are coming in, to feel completely lost. And I guess, like, sometimes, people do want, like, at least like at least an example of how people are thinking about the issues written down. The other thing I wanted to say is that, like, I think regarding this route of requiring recipients to agree at the nomination step, like, I think that route also has some very serious costs that we should also be aware of. Like, just as an example, like, let's say we decide that we want to reward some random academic cryptography professor in some university somewhere, right? Like, very worthy goal. Potentially, like, Neil Koblitz or whoever, deserves a lot. He did do a lot for basically created elliptic curve cryptography, but from his point of view, like, if he gets an email saying, like, hey guys, we're doing an experiment, would you like to participate? Like, the chance that he would be willing to actually, like, do the work, especially if it's a substantial amount of work that involves basically submitting a de facto tax return to a DAO, but then to evaluate, like, your how needy you are for means testing purposes, like, that's much less likely to happen than the user experience for Neil would be much more pleasant if it's like, hey Neil, like, we have a magic down. We decided to give you $19,000 worth of ETH. Like, would you like it? So I guess it's worth kind of like thinking through that trade-off too. And it's also worth, like, thinking through the idea of, like, whether or not this concept of nomination to voting, like, needs to have kind of two more than one internal step. Like, might we want some kind of infrastructure to help people help badge holders filter more, instead of saying, like, hey, here's a big list that's realistically going to be more and more spammy over time, and then everyone has to vote on it immediately.
Chris.
Yeah, so I just wanted to reiterate on the fairness ratio stuff. Like, I kind of like this idea that, while voting, we would be aware more or less of the value that was already extracted by a given project, and then I guess our votes would be, you would, like, a badge holder would vote on the impact, right? And then fairness ratio should be always more or less 1.0, right? Which I think makes a lot of sense. And I would be curious, I'm very curious, how would it be different, how the funds would be distributed differently in this round if you would apply, just as a thought experiment, if you would just, get the value extracted out of these teams, just ask how much, money they got in grants or whatever. And then, do this exercise and see how different would it be now.
Agreed. Hey, by the way, Vitalik, you've been very patient. You shared a file way up above. Are you interested in us going over that?
Yeah, no, so that was basically just put up a very quick kind of if someone wants to read, there we go. Just on the left side is the top 25 of the Gitcoin round 11 results from the technical sections only. And on the right is the top 25 from the retro. And I thought it would be an interesting exercise to just stare at the two columns and, I guess, like, see what differences we could identify, see what the differences say about the differences in kind of thinking philosophy of the two groups. I mean, and possibly also ask the question, like, are there any things in the left list that should have been in the right list?
This is actually my first time seeing this comparison too, and this is really cool. I need to look through this more.
What was the Gitcoin grant round theme again?
The left column mixes two themes, which is DApp tech and infra tech.
Something just to point out, like if people don't know that, I think for Gitcoin you have to nominate yourself, right? Like you set up, and then so for this one that wasn't necessarily the case. I wonder if that's why there's some lack of overlap. At least I know for DApp tools, that's one of the reasons why we go up on one side and not the other.
That's a really interesting distinction, which is like, yeah, what, you know, who wouldn't nominate themselves that like could get nominated? Like Neil, like that cryptographer, like kind of person is a great example. Probably would not put up a grant, like probably just like is doing their cryptography work. But that's really cool.
There's another distinction here, right? Where with Gitcoin, you can have your community vote for you with their capital.
Right.
When did the Gitcoin grant vote happen? Because I also think, at least to me, like the list on the right is a lot more familiar than the list on the left, and I wonder if it's like
this is round 11, which is the newest one. I guess like my interpretation of the kind of greater familiarity is that the list on the right like explicitly specifies retroactive, and that by definition I think requires like choosing projects that people are going to be pretty familiar with, whereas like on the left it's like quadratic, open-ended quadratic funding, and so people are going to be totally willing to kind of fund things that are totally speculative because they think that it has potential.
One other note here is I see Dark Forest is pretty high on the Gitcoin grants, and I actually talked with them about like getting onto the retro PGF stuff, and they're like, I don't think we count as a public good, and so that was part of why they didn't like campaign for that. So I think part of it was wording around like what types of projects could be retroactively funded.
Yeah, another plug for the fairness ratio there. Anyone can be nominated.
Actually, just would be interested to hear like direct answers to my last question, which was, is there any specific project on the left, not on the right, that you think should have been on the right?
I think Go Ethereum and Aragon and Ipsilon and who else? Solidity, Hive. I think all of these things definitely could have been on the left, but the people who run those things.
Things that were on the left that should be on the right.
Oh, sorry.
And my first instinct was Dark Forest. And Kevin, you brought it up already.
Yeah, definitely on my list.
Probably Brownie.
Brownie.
So why didn't we nominate Brownie?
In my case, I'd say Frame, but it is on the list, just lower down.
Yeah,
because
Brownie
it's a tiny project compared to the others.
Yeah, Brownie was definitely on the list. I voted for them.
I see Connects, and I think Connects and Hop, when I think of the Optimism ecosystem, at least internally, they're really helpful, but they also fall into that synthetics chain link class of projects where they're like they do make money. When I see it, I do think, yes, benefits ecosystem.
An interesting one on the left is Prism and Prismatic Labs, which is like an interesting example of, do we say that the impact cannot be retroactively awarded because we don't have ETH2, or should we say that the impact already is there because it's driving forward ETH2, and like it means that ETH2 is about to come out, you know? I think I have no idea.
I'm into partial impacts that, I mean, people use
come on, the
Prismatic.
beacon chain exists. People have even made 200,000 ETH of staking rewards off of it.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's a question of like, how long have these folks been working on the project, right? Because like a project is like, a month old. It's like, okay, like, is that really like, have they been working on this long enough to really get a sense of like what they're doing? But if they've worked on it for like years, I mean, like that's, I think, totally valid, even if they're not like, finished, not a finished.
But what if in the last month, 80% of dApp developers started using it, and in the past 2 years, only 1% has
Right.
used the other?
Yeah, That I don't have a great answer to that. Unfortunately, it's a good question.
As long as you give without expecting to receive, maybe.
Yeah, we're coming up with a bunch of trolley problems. I agree.
Super funny trolley problem. Pull the lever.
If somebody nominated a lever that would divert a train away from people, should we vote for them even though it's not retroactive?
Send that tweet. That's perfect. Do the trolley problem diagram. Just...
Jeff.
This does, in a kind of a more serious way, touch on this broader thing that we've been digging into, which is that when you set up a system like this, it's not just the decisions you're making, it's the expectations that you're trying to set and the circular relationship between the expectations and the standards and all these sorts of things. Like, my gut reaction to such trolley problems, of course we don't do that, because then we incentivize people to set up trolley problems, which is horrible and anti-human. But that does kind of get into a lot of this subtlety around the retroactive stuff, which is that, are we trying to set up an ecosystem of people who speculatively fund things that don't have a business model because they know it'll be good anyways? Is that an objective? And if so, there are lots of tangible and intangible things that we can do to make that more likely and create that world.
I personally think it definitely is an objective. I'm curious about what you think those intangible or tangible things are, because I would love to see that future be real.
I mean, like, one really obvious thing is that if we want to create this world, there should be people out there doing both ends of it, right? Like, yes, we're doing retroactive and we're looking back and saying, what are the projects that have already done good in the world? And that's the plan for this type of funding, maybe, if that's what we decide to do. But also, like, the whole left-hand side of this picture, there's lots of speculative stuff. And it's a little bit tricky, but creating methods that track those types of contributions, like maybe just set up some specific like ERC token factory that's like future good tokens or something, and you give it to the project, and when you do it through the contract, and it just assigns you the number of tokens of what you contributed, so that later on we don't run into this kind of more confusing thing of like, okay, well, like who was actually part of this team but then joined this team, so like if we fund this team now, they're actually the people who worked on the old thing, and those are the people we want to reward for what they did in the past. Like that was a tricky thing to me, figuring out how to divide votes with execution clients, because there's been recent change, and when you look back at important work that was done in the past and those people have connected to new teams, it's like, am I trying to reward the brand? Am I trying to reward the people? And if you have some kind of tracking mechanism, it doesn't really matter what it is, even if it's literally just a spreadsheet that you bothered keeping around from the past, it just makes it a little bit simpler to figure those things out.
I wouldn't mind having a guideline or something that we agree upon that is like our main objective. Like, what are we trying to achieve here, right? I wouldn't mind having something like that. Like, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to help people that really need that exit funding, right? Are we trying to grab a little project and make it grow real fast, right? Or are we trying to just recognize people that otherwise would not be recognized for the contributions they made, right? Like, and I think that this is something that we agree all as a group, right? And it's more like a community thing. But I think it would be beneficial to agree on something.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will say, Austin, I'm very excited for the retroactive public goods funding starting kit.
Heck yeah, we're working on it.
So Jeff, I agree 100% that please, yes, we need open source projects to track contributions with tokens or anything. It doesn't have to be tokens, but just track your contributions, please, so we can reward the people fairly.
Well, and I do think it's worth saying that like contributions are not the only form of thing you want to reward, and when we're talking about fairly, it's not just about tokens, and it's not just about these easy financial mechanisms. And these are subtle things that every organization deals with in terms of like how do you decide the relative value of different intangible contributions. But so many open source projects are driven by time and dedication and things that aren't monetary, and obviously we need to take that into account as well.
Yeah.
So time check, we are over time. I've been loving this conversation. I can go for a bit longer, but we should start to think about closing up probably. Thank you all for taking so much of it. Yeah, I feel like Matt, you had posted some questions there you wanted at the last minute, which was why retro frame and not MetaMask. I feel like this is kind of related. I think the point is that frame builds on MetaMask source. Is that why you were saying that?
I don't know anything about their technology. I just realized that this is a newer project that has a lot less traction than MetaMask, whereas MetaMask is something that's been around since pretty much the beginning and is like clearly provided more value to the ecosystem than Frame has.
Yeah.
I was also just like a little
case,
upset to see that there was a person who voted all 10 votes for Frame.
I don't feel so bad anymore.
Well, my way of thinking was that MetaMask doesn't need it, and it's healthy for the space to have competition, right? And Frame is just a very small team of 2 people. So my criteria is to create diversity.
Makes sense. Yeah, I agree that we should really have clear like retro guidelines. I feel like there's some meme of like, it's your responsibility to vote for what happened because you're preserving the forwards looking legitimacy, that will evolve the secondary market or something like this. I feel like there's some guideline or something that we can say there. I also think, Matt, just because I'm trying to close loose ends, right? I also think your other point on funding individuals being complicated, that's definitely, I definitely agree with that one. Like, yeah, I did see Danny Ryan in there and I did vote for him and it was like, how do I think about the rest of the EF team? And how do I think about, there's like, you could get into a real potential mess there if you're not careful.
Yeah, I think this is like just generally like funding, grants, anything that's where the money goes to like a leader or someone in charge of some sort of effort or team has to then try and figure out how to disperse it amongst the team. This is like really complicated. And it's like slightly different than funding a specific person. Like, do I think that Danny or like Tim Bako are like people who do really good work and are deserving of funding? Yeah. But then we have this problem of like, how do we differentiate between like their platform that they are pretty much on? Like Tim Bako is a great leader of like the all core devs, but this is like a really powerful platform that he has as well that's like reinforces his presence on the internet and on Twitter. And so like, are we overcompensating for the platform versus like the actual output of the people? Hard to know.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think, and by the way, I do think that this whole concept of do we mandate that it's retroactive? Do we, start trying to define things like the fairness ratio or like, how much process do we add? It's like as to kind of what Vitalik said is that it's like a fine art because you kind of do want to say that it is going to be retroactive so that you spur that secondary market and you make a legitimate source for the secondary market of funding, but you also don't want to over mandate. But anyway, I just think that's a good example of like mandating something that's actually useful. So we got to find that fine line.
Agreed. Any other parting thoughts here, y'all?
I just wanted to thank everybody for all their great participation and for bearing with us. You know, we're trying to figure all this stuff out, and I'm sure we had tons of moments where it may have been frustrating for you guys as badge holders. Thank you for bearing with us, and thank you for all the feedback. We're trying to build this new thing, and definitely nowhere near perfect yet, but we're trying to get there.
I was just gonna say, actually, that's an awesome first round. Like, I think this is a really good starting point, and like, yeah, there always can be hiccups, but like, I think this was just like amazing as a first start.
Woot woot! Yay, Fuzzy.
Nice.
All right, y'all. Let's hit end on the recording on that lovely note. Thank you all for attending and sticking with us and discussing. Bye.
Yay.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Wow.
Rick Moo's here.
No,
Wait, no, did we reject him? Oh, Rick Moo's here. Woo! All right, that's
Rick,
say hi.
we literally just ended the recording.
I think I'm a bit late. I just saw the notification on the phone, but yes.
Damn. Literally, as everyone was dropping off of the call, your admit appeared. It was like, oh no.
I mean, I didn't really have much to say. I just thought, like, this is regarding the optimism thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. I mean, that was crazy. Yeah. Anyways, Ethers is very happy. Thank you all.
Yay.
Thank you. Bye.
No problemo. And the recording will be online if you want to listen in later.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Sweet.
Okay. Thank you very much. Great to see you all.
Bye.
Bye.